Floating face up in the water, only a few feet from the side of the boat, was the body of a young woman. Grab your flashlight, everyone, 'cause these 5 true, scary ocean stories will keep you away from the sea for a long time. Number 1. I must have been around 15 when my grandfather took me out in his small boat to go fishing at night. It was in 1959 in Mauritius. Life was hard, but we were happy and the sea was full of resources, fishes, lobsters, and I enjoyed fishing. I still do. However, even though I shared the same passion as my grandpa, we were not the best friends. He was very harsh sometimes, abusive, mainly when he would drink, but I could make it with him. It was another story with my dad. Anyway, we took the sea in his small boat of 24 feet with a heavy and noisy fuel engine at around 5 p.m. and had hope of bringing as much fish as possible by the end of the night. We left from a place called Ambient, which is on the west coast of Mauritius. My grandpa used to work as a postman, but left his job to become a fisherman by passion. My dad took over his former job. The sea was calm and the air was slightly warm. Usually, it means that it would rain, but the sky was almost clear. We could see the stars, and the moon came up after the sunset. We reached the place my grandpa knew was fishy, and we started. We did not talk much, only when we needed something. We were not too far from the coast, maybe 3 or 4 kilometers away. We were in the open sea. We were in a part of the seafloor bed which raises close to the sea surface and where fishes come to feed. It's very fishy. We had been fishing for a good 4 hours and had caught a fair amount of fish. We did not realize, but the current had made us drift away, and we discovered that we had been pulled quite far from the coast. Grandpa tried to start the engine, but it did not trigger. He tried again and again and again, but nothing happened. Fortunately, the sea had remained calm, but the swells were much bigger and quite scary. In those days, we were not equipped for security as we are today. No radio, cells, or life jackets. You had to fight for your life. The boat drifted another hour. We had stopped fishing and were trying to figure out what to do and what would happen. All kind of dark thoughts got hold of me, and I imagined myself dying of thirst on the boat in the middle of the sea, or stumble out of the boat, rocked by a big wave and drowning in these dark waters full of scary creatures. Suddenly, we started to hear music. It sounded like music from the 40s. We looked around, and there was no boat or whatsoever. The coast was now quite far, maybe 7 to 8 kilometers, and it was impossible that music from the coast would be heard by us. The atmosphere was eerie. Then the sound of music became louder, with sound of people talking, exactly like it would during a cocktail. We tried to look for a ship, but there was none around. There was no mist and the sky was fair. We were even under the first or last quarter moonlight, which was now high in the sky. We started to panic. Now, Try to imagine what it is like to feel lost on the sea at night, plus starting to face spooky things. The cocktail sound became closer, and there was still nothing around. Grandpa was fighting now against the engine to start it. The party sound stopped, and we could now hear whispers all around us. We hardly talked to each other, just looked at each other to understand that we were experiencing the same things. I could not understand what was being said, but there were male and female voices in the whispers. My stomach was so tight with fear that it was sore, and my neck was hard like a stick. I felt like becoming feverish from fear. I got hold of the cable of the engine and pulled as hard as I could to start it. The whispers were becoming very scary, and we had to leave that place. Suddenly, the engine started, and Grandpa pushed me back and grabbed the throttle. We shot straight to the coast, surfing on the waves. I wonder if Grandpa checked for reefs when coming back so fast we wanted to flee this place. We eventually made it after almost an hour. The whispers had stayed behind. We were so scared when we reached the beach that we forgot all our fish in the boat. We came back in the morning and the fish had started to rotten. We lost about 75 kilograms of fish that day and never got to know what we encountered. The strangest thing is that there are no known ships which wrecked, and no other fishermen experienced what we lived. Some have encountered weird animals, and others think they saw ghosts floating above the water, but not in the same area, and nothing of the same nature. Number 2. A friend of mine was an avid fisherman, and he and his dad used to go out sea fishing whenever they could. A few years ago, he told me this story, and it creeped the hell out of me, so this seems like an appropriate place to tell it. My friend and his dad were on the second night of a trip deep sea fishing, and they decided to get some sleep in the early evening so they could go for whatever fish they were after at around 1 a.m. The best time to get this fish apparently. Anyway, they only had a smallish boat, but the weather was extremely pleasant and the sea was calm to the point of stillness, so they figured it would be a great night's fishing for them. Around 12:30 a.m., they started to set their gear up, and as they were on the starboard side, getting bait ready, they heard a loud splash on the port side. As there was almost no swell, they figured it was either a large fish or some gear had somehow fallen in, so they went over to have a look. Floating face up in the water, only a few feet from the side of the boat, was a young woman. They reckoned she couldn't have been more than about 30 at the most. She showed absolutely no signs of decomposition, and there was nothing tangled in her hair, all of which would normally suggest she had been in the water for some time. She was wearing a simple white skirt and a blue-collared strappy top, both of which were clean and apparently looked barely wet. Again, all indicating she had only just gone into the water. She showed no signs of damage like having been beaten or attacked, and her eyes and mouth were shut. My friend said she looked totally peaceful and like she was simply asleep and just floating on her back in the water. They were both totally freaked out by the whole thing, but reacting more to the need to make sure she was okay, instead of just standing there trying to work out where she came from. They tried to wake her up, shouting to her, and they threw a line to her, hoping they may catch her, enough to pull her back in. She showed no signs of movement, and the splashing around they were making with the rope served only to let her body drift further away from the boat. When she was a few meters away, my friend ran off to grab a fishing rod, hoping they could pull her in that way, and his dad ran to the cabin to try and call a Coast Guard for help. When my friend got back to the side, she was vanished. He frantically searched around and splashed into the water with a rod, thinking she had bobbed underwater or even drifted under the boat somehow, but the body had vanished. Eventually, his dad, figuring they couldn't just leave a potential dead unconscious body floating in the water, jumped in and swam over to where she had last seen, hoping he may find her under the surface, but they couldn't find anything. They did eventually drive the boat around in a good half-kilometer circle, but they never saw the body again. The Coast Guard did come out, and obviously my friend and his dad were kind of interrogated to make sure they hadn't dumped the body, but nothing came of it all. The freakiest thing about it all was that the boat was thoroughly checked before they had set out fishing the day before, so they could say with certainty that there had been no woman on board when they set off. The apparently fresh state of the body kind of removed the possibility that she had been in the water a while, and that they just found the body and they were far enough out from land and nowhere near any other boats that her appearance there was just totally unexplainable. My friend and his dad hadn't been gone more than 20 seconds from the side of the boat, but in that time the body just vanished. They were both really shaken by the whole thing and were most terrified by the fact that her appearance was presented by the heavy splash in the water, to them suggesting the body had only just entered the water from their own boat. Number 3. We saw one in the middle of the English Channel, and it was the strangest thing. There was thin cloud, but the sun was visible through it. We were within the total eclipse zone and could see the shadow coming from miles away. It looked like the biggest, most angry storm I have ever seen. Generally, the darker the clouds, the more it's going to hurt. This was a darkness as dark as is possible at sea during the day. Talked to my dad about it afterwards, and we both felt a real uneasiness getting worse and worse the nearer it got. Our bodies and subconscious were redying us for dealing with a really shitty, dangerous situation. It was like how people sometimes describe sensing a ghost, a cold chill and feeling really on edge. It was like a ghost storm. A lot of sailing becomes instinctual after a while, and you get a feeling about what's coming from watching the clouds and waves off on the horizon. The eclipse gave off every sign of absolute nastiness, but passed without any real world effect other than darkness. Really creepy. Number 4. Not me, but my father, back in his commercial fishing days, noticed that there was a t-shirt in the middle of his net after a tow. After a little investigation, he found that it was not a shirt but a human torso wearing a shirt. He said he was terrified that he would open the net and a head would roll out onto his feet, but it didn't happen. His captain radioed ahead and they brought the torso back to the docks, where they were met by the police and the coroner. They were eventually able to identify the body, based on the clothing, as a victim of a plane crash that had occurred fairly recently. Number 5. I was working on a car carrier 4 years ago in the Middle East. Our typical route went through pirate waters at times, and so we always picked up 4 ex-Marines as security in Aqaba, Jordan, before we went. One night, while we were going through pirate waters off of Yemen, we started to have problems with the main engine. So we stopped and had to drift for a bit to figure out what the problem was. During this time, I was working on the stern back end of the vessel. I couldn't really see anything out in the ocean. Everything was dimly lit on the ship. I don't know why, but I got bored and turned on the spotlight, and there he was. This guy with a gun in a rusted little boat, staring at me about 15 feet from the ship. I just stared back at him, kind of stunned. I was afraid if I reached for the radio to call one of the Marines, he'd shoot me. So he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he sort of gave me a nod, as if he was telling me, "Well played." And I gave him one back. Then he slowly rowed his boat back off into the deep, pitch-black night. I didn't know how many others were there, but I did call it on the radio as soon as I lost sight of him. I still remember his face today. That deep, stern, concentrated look haunts me till today. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. If you liked these horror ocean stories and want to hear more, please leave a thumbs up and a comment. Also, if you are enjoying my videos, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you all in my next video.